March 1943. Ridgefield Farm Collective, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Livestock specialist Margaret Maggie Whitmore stood at the window of the veterinary office watching the neighboring barn through the morning fog. It was 6:47 a.m. In 10 minutes, the scheduled vaccination of young stock was supposed to begin, but Maggie couldn't tear herself away from the window. On the other side, beyond the fence line, men were loading carcasses into a Chevrolet flatbed truck. This would have been ordinary business, except for one detail. Maggie had worked as a livestock specialist for 4 years, and she knew every animal in her sector by tag number, by markings, by temperament. And what they were loading into the truck bed didn't match yesterday's slaughter records. Yesterday's paperwork showed 3 second-year steers from the feedlot. But right now, they were throwing carcasses of young heifers from the breeding herd into the truck. Maggie recognized them by their distinctive markings. One of them, a red heifer with a white patch on her right side, was the daughter of the farm's best record-holding milk cow. This heifer wasn't supposed to be slaughtered at all. She was registered in the breeding book and worth more than a month's wages for the entire farm crew. Maggie squinted, trying to make out the faces of the men at the truck. The distance was about 200 yards. The fog interfered, but she recognized the figure of Dalton Pritchard, foreman of the neighboring barn. Broad-shouldered, with a characteristic limp in his left leg from an old threshing accident. 3 other men bustled around him. Maggie didn't get a good look at them. The truck started with a grinding sound. Black smoke poured from the exhaust pipe, and the vehicle slowly headed toward the farm gates. Maggie was 26 years old. She was born in 1917 to a schoolteacher's family, graduated from Pennsylvania State College with honors in animal husbandry in 1939, and returned to work in her home county. She married mechanic Dale Cunningham that same year, and in October 1940 gave birth to a daughter, Ruth. Now, in March 1943, the girl was 2 years and 5 months old. Dale worked as a tractor mechanic on the same collective farm, and they lived in a small house on the edge of town. Life had been simple, understandable, right? Until this morning. Maggie took the ledger from the windowsill and opened it to yesterday's page. Livestock slaughter, March 14, 1943. Barn number 2, Foreman Pritchard D.W. 3 second-year steers from feedlot. Tag numbers, 1147, 1148, 1151. Foreman's signature, veterinarian signature, official stamp. Everything proper, everything by the book. But Maggie had seen with her own eyes them hauling away breeding heifers. She closed the ledger and looked at the clock. 2 minutes to 7. In 8 minutes, the morning briefing with the head livestock manager would begin, and she was supposed to report on the condition of the young stock. Maggie put on her canvas jacket and left the vet office. The fog had thickened, moisture hung in the air. She walked not toward the office, but toward barn number 2. She covered the 200 yards in 3 minutes, following the rope strung between posts. Without that guide rope in heavy fog, a person could get lost and freeze before reaching their destination. The barn area greeted her with silence. Usually at this time, the place was bustling with work, milking cows, distributing feed, cleaning stalls. But now, the yard was empty. Only the wind scattered bits of hay and newspaper scraps across the concrete. Maggie pushed open the barn door. Inside, it smelled of manure, silage, and that special warm odor unique to cattle housing. The stalls weren't completely filled. She walked along the row, counting animals. 32 stalls, 28 occupied, 4 empty. Maggie stopped at stall number 14. The tag read 0891, breeding heifer first calf, red with white patch on right side. The stall was empty. The bedding was fresh, the feed trough clean, as if no one had ever stood here. She checked the other 3 empty stalls, numbers 0894, 0897, 0903. All 3 breeding heifers, all 3 absent. Maggie headed back toward the door and heard voices. She quickly ducked behind the partition where feed sacks were stored. Through a gap in the boards, she could see the entrance. 2 men entered. Foreman Pritchard and another man Maggie didn't know. The stranger wore a good leather jacket, and on his head a fedora hat. His face was broad, with high cheekbones, and a scar ran from his ear to his chin. He looked to be about 45, no younger. 4 head, as we agreed, Pritchard said. All young, all healthy. We'll backdate the paperwork. Price? The stranger's voice was hoarse, with a characteristic rasp. Quote 4, quote 5, quote 6. The stranger grunted. Quote 7, quote 8. They exchanged a few more words and left. Maggie waited 5 minutes, then carefully emerged from behind the sacks. The barn was empty. She left through the back door and headed back to the vet office, trying to stay off the main paths. The fog hadn't lifted. When she reached her office, the clock showed 7:20. The briefing had long since started. Her absence had certainly been noticed. But right now, that didn't matter. Maggie took a clean sheet of paper from the desk drawer and began writing down everything she'd seen and heard. Date, time, location, names, animal tag numbers. She wrote quickly, precisely, the way she'd been taught in college when composing scientific reports. When she finished, she tucked the sheet into her jacket pocket. Then she took the ledger and opened it again to yesterday's entry. Livestock slaughter, barn number 2, 3 steers. She copied the numbers into her notebook. Then she opened the breeding registry and found the entries for the 4 heifers, 0891, 0894, 0897, 0903. All 4 were alive as of March 13th. All 4 had notations for planned breeding in April. So they'd been slaughtered without documentation, without paperwork, and the meat sold off the books. And in the official reports, they showed slaughter of cheap feedlot stock. The price difference went into pockets. Maggie calculated in her head. A breeding heifer first calf was worth about $1,200 by government rates. A second-year steer, maybe $350. Difference of $850 per head. 4 head meant $3,400 in one go. If the scheme had been running 3 years, hauling out at least once a month, that was over $120,000 total. The kind of money people kill for. Maggie sat at the desk, staring at her notes. She could go to the farm superintendent right now, show him what she'd discovered. But the superintendent was Vernon Blackwood, and she'd just heard Pritchard say Blackwood personally oversaw the operation. Going to him meant signing her own death warrant. She could go to the county agricultural office, to the State Department. But would they believe her? She had no proof except her own observations and overheard conversation. No photographs, no documents, no witnesses. Her word against established men with 3 years of falsified records backing their story. And with the war on, with all the pressure to meet production quotas, with meat rationed and every pound of beef tracked for the military effort, would anyone want to investigate? Or would they prefer to sweep it under the rug, keep the supply chain moving, avoid the scandal? Maggie thought about Dale. He was scheduled to ship out to basic training in 4 weeks. The draft had caught up with him despite his exemption as an essential agricultural worker. Someone at the county board had decided mechanics could be replaced more easily than they thought. In 4 weeks he'd be gone, and she'd be here, alone with Ruth. If she pursued this, if she made waves, what would happen to them? She looked at the paper in her hand. 4 heifers. $3,400. 3 years of theft. A conspiracy reaching to the top of the farm administration. And her, a 26-year-old woman with a 2-year-old daughter and a husband about to go to war. The smart thing would be to burn this paper, forget what she saw, keep her head down. The safe thing. The thing that would protect her family. But Maggie Whitmore hadn't gotten through Pennsylvania State on a scholarship by being someone who took the easy road. She folded the paper carefully and put it in her inside pocket, next to her heart. At the evening briefing, head livestock manager Raymond Hoskins assigned her to inspect the breeding records for all barns. "We've got an audit coming from the State Agriculture Department in 2 months," he said. War Production Board wants to verify our breeding stock numbers. Make sure we're maintaining adequate replacement levels for the dairy herd. I need you to go through every barn, cross-check the physical animals against the registry, update any discrepancies. Maggie nodded. When do you need it finished? End of April. Take your time, be thorough. This audit is important. Washington is watching all the collective farms now, making sure we're not slaughtering breeding stock for meat quotas. The irony wasn't lost on Maggie. She spent the next week doing exactly what Hoskins had assigned, but she did it with a different purpose. She went through every barn methodically, counting animals, checking tags, comparing them to the breeding registry and the slaughter records. The pattern emerged clearly. Barn number 2, Dalton Pritchard's operation, showed consistent discrepancies. Every month, 3 to 5 breeding animals disappeared from the physical count. Every month, the slaughter records showed only feedlot stock or cull animals. The difference in value per month ranged from $2,000 to $4,000. Over 3 years, conservatively, $150,000 had been stolen. But the pattern wasn't limited to barn number 2. Barn number 5, run by foreman Theodore Grantham, showed similar discrepancies, though less frequent. Barn number 7, under Harvey Blackwood, Vernon's brother, had the same pattern. 3 barns, 3 foremen, all running the same scheme, all signing off on each other's paperwork, all protected by Raymond Hoskins at the top and Vernon Blackwood as superintendent. Maggie documented everything in a separate ledger she kept hidden in her house. She made 2 copies of every page, storing one set in a metal box buried in her garden, the other in a friend's house in town. She photographed some of the most damning documents using Dale's camera, the one he'd bought before the war for taking pictures of Ruth. She developed the film herself in the darkroom at the local newspaper office, telling the editor she was working on a family photo album. By early April, she had a complete case. Documented proof of systematic theft spanning 3 years, involving at least 7 men, totaling over $200,000. Enough evidence to send them all to federal prison for decades. The week before Dale left, Maggie walked through every detail of her documentation one more time. She sat at the kitchen table each night after Ruth went to bed, cross-referencing dates, verifying calculations, making sure every claim could be proven. She knew that once this became public, the defense would attack every weak point, every assumption, every gap in the evidence. There could be no weak points. On the night of April 2nd, she organized everything into a chronological narrative. Started with the morning of March 15th when she'd first witnessed the theft. Documented each barn she'd inspected, each discrepancy she'd found, each pattern that emerged. She included photographs of the breeding registry showing animals that should have been alive but weren't. She included copies of slaughter records showing animals that were supposedly killed but that didn't match the actual carcasses she'd observed. She included her own handwritten notes from that first morning, with timestamps and exact descriptions. The evidence filled a manila folder 2 inches thick. She made 3 complete copies. One would go to the FBI. One she buried in the metal box in her garden, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. The third she gave to her friend Martha Henderson, who ran the boarding house on Maple Street. "If anything happens to me," Maggie told her, "you give this to Sheriff Hewitt, not to anyone else, only Hewitt." Martha looked at the folder, then at Maggie. She was a widow in her 50s, had known Maggie since she was a girl. "What kind of trouble are you in?" "The kind where powerful men don't want the truth coming out." "And you're going after them anyway?" "Someone has to." Martha put the folder in her safe. "You be careful, Maggie Cunningham. This world doesn't always reward courage." "I know, but it should." Dale knew something was happening, but Maggie didn't tell him the details. She couldn't. If he knew what she was about to do, he might try to stop her, might stay instead of going to basic training, might put himself in danger. So she kissed him goodbye on the morning of April 3rd and told him she loved him, told him to be safe, told him to write. And she didn't mention the thick envelope she'd already prepared, addressed to the FBI field office in Philadelphia, sitting in her desk drawer waiting to be mailed. On April 4th, Dale left for basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Maggie stood on the platform at Lancaster Station, holding Ruth, watching the train pull away. Dale waved from the window until he was out of sight. Ruth cried. Maggie didn't. She couldn't afford to. That night, after putting Ruth to bed, Maggie sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to the county agricultural office, not to the State Department, to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in Philadelphia. She wrote 12 pages, single-spaced, detailing everything she'd discovered. She included photocopies of key documents, cross-referenced with the breeding registry and slaughter records. She explained the scheme, named the participants, calculated the losses to the government. She noted that with wartime meat rationing in effect, this wasn't just theft, but potential sabotage of the war effort, diverting breeding stock meant to maintain dairy production for troops and civilians. She mailed the letter from the post office in Harrisburg, 30 miles away, using a return address of a boarding house where she'd paid the landlady $5 to hold any mail. She didn't want anyone at Ridgefield connecting her to the investigation. Then, she went home and waited. 3 weeks passed. Maggie continued her work, said nothing to anyone. Raymond Hoskins asked her twice about the breeding audit, seemed nervous. She told him she was still working on it, finding some minor discrepancies in the older records, nothing major. He relaxed. She watched him carefully during those weeks, noting his routines, his associations. He met with Vernon Blackwood every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock in Vernon's office. The meetings lasted exactly 30 minutes. She documented this too, wrote it in her notebook. Pattern of coordination between head livestock manager and farm superintendent. Regular meetings, consistent schedule, unusual level of contact for their respective positions. Hoskins also met with Dalton Pritchard every Thursday afternoon at the barn. These meetings were shorter, 15 minutes, always in the feed storage room where they couldn't be easily observed. But Maggie had found a vantage point from the hayloft where she could watch through gaps in the boards. She never heard what they said, but she saw the pattern. Hoskins would arrive. They'd talk. Hoskins would leave with a small envelope in his jacket pocket. Cash payments, she assumed. The same pattern with Theodore Grantham on Wednesdays, with Harvey Blackwood on Fridays. A weekly rotation, keeping everyone paid, keeping everyone quiet. She documented all of it, every meeting, every envelope, every pattern. By the time the FBI arrived, she had a complete picture not just of the theft itself, but of the organization behind it. The command structure, the payment system, the coordination mechanisms. It was more than evidence of fraud. It was a blueprint of criminal conspiracy. On April 26th, a Monday, 2 men in dark suits arrived at Ridgefield Farm. They went directly to Vernon Blackwood's office and stayed there for 4 hours. When they left, they took 3 filing cabinets of records with them. Vernon's face was ashen. The next day, federal agents arrived in force. 8 men, led by Special Agent Frank Kellerman, FBI. They seized all breeding registries, all slaughter records, all financial documents going back 5 years. They interviewed every foreman, every livestock worker, every office clerk. They brought in auditors from the Department of Agriculture. They impounded 3 trucks and traced their delivery routes for the past year. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, Maggie kept working, kept her head down. Nobody suspected her. Nobody thought the quiet livestock specialist who'd compiled the breeding audit could be the one who'd brought the federal government down on them. In early June, the arrests began. Vernon Blackwood was taken from his home at dawn, charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States government, theft of government property, falsification of official records, and black market racketeering. Bail set at $50,000. Dalton Pritchard, arrested at the barn, same charges plus assault on a federal officer when he'd tried to run. Raymond Hoskins, arrested at the county agricultural office where he'd gone thinking he was safe. Theodore Grantham and Harvey Blackwood, arrested the same day. 4 office clerks who'd helped falsify records, 2 livestock buyers who'd purchased the stolen meat, 1 truck driver who'd transported it. 14 men total, the entire conspiracy broken open. Special Agent Kellerman came to see Maggie at the vet office 3 days after the arrests. He was a compact man in his 40s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Quote, 21, quote, he said, quote, 22, quote. Maggie nodded, quote, 23, quote, quote, 24, quote, quote, 25, quote. Kellerman studied her. Quote, 26, quote, quote, 27, quote, quote, 28, quote. Maggie thought about that, about the red heifer with the white patch, daughter of the best cow on the farm, slaughtered for profit. About the breeding program she'd helped build, undermined by greed. About Dale, somewhere in New Jersey learning to be a soldier, trusting that the home front was secure. Because it was wrong, she said simply, and because someone had to stop it. Kellerman nodded slowly. The trial will start in August. We'll need you to testify. You understand that means your role will become public? I understand. There may be repercussions. These men have families, friends, allies, people who'll blame you for what happens to them. Let them blame me. I did what was right. Kellerman shook her hand. The country needs more people like you, Mrs. Cunningham. The trial began August 16, 1943, in federal court in Philadelphia. The courtroom was packed. Farmers from Lancaster County, journalists from Philadelphia and Harrisburg, government officials from the Agriculture Department. Maggie testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through the breeding records, the slaughter documents, the discrepancies she'd found. She brought charts showing the pattern of theft over 3 years. She explained how the scheme worked, how they'd systematically stolen high-value breeding stock and substituted cheap feedlot animals in the paperwork. The prosecution had set up an easel with large display boards showing the evidence. Board 1. Photographs of the breeding registry with Maggie's handwritten notes marking discrepancies. Board 2. A timeline showing the pattern of thefts, 1 entry per month for 36 months. Board 3. Financial calculations showing the total value stolen. Board 4. Organizational chart showing the hierarchy of the conspiracy, from Vernon Blackwood at the top, down through Hoskins, the 3 foremen, the clerks, the buyers. Maggie stood beside the boards and walked the jury through each element. She spoke clearly, precisely, without emotion. She explained technical terms when necessary. She defined, quote, 36 versus, quote, 37, explained why the value difference mattered, showed how the substitution worked on paper. Quote 38, she said, pointing to an entry in the breeding registry. Quote 39. She moved her pointer to the corresponding line. Quote 40. She moved to a different board showing the slaughter records. Quote 41. She paused. Let the questions sit. Quote 42. The defense attorney objected. Quote 43. The judge looked at Maggie. Quote 44. Quote 45. Quote 46. Maggie continued. She walked through 4 more examples, each following the same pattern. Breeding animal registered as alive. Slaughter record showing cheap animal killed. Physical observation proving the valuable animal was actually dead. By the time she finished the first day of testimony, the pattern was undeniable. The second day, the defense attorneys tried to shake her testimony, suggested she was mistaken, questioned her expertise. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 47 underscore, underscore, the lead defense attorney said, his tone condescending. She told them. The attorney changed tactics. The attorney had no response to that. The prosecution brought in Agriculture Department auditors who confirmed her calculations. Federal agents testified about finding hidden account ledgers in Vernon Blackwood's safe, showing cash payments matching the pattern Maggie had documented. The truck driver broke under questioning and admitted to delivering meat to black market buyers in Baltimore and Washington, splitting the proceeds with Pritchard and Vernon. One of the livestock buyers, offered immunity in exchange for testimony, admitted he'd been buying stolen breeding stock for 3 years, knew it was stolen, paid premium prices in cash. The case was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts for all 14 defendants. Sentencing came in October. Vernon Blackwood, 15 years federal prison, $50,000 fine, forfeiture of all assets. Dalton Pritchard, 15 years, $40,000 fine. Raymond Hoskins, 12 years, $30,000 fine. Theodore Grantham and Harvey Blackwood, 10 years each. The others received sentences ranging from 3 to 7 years. All were banned from government agricultural work for life. Maggie sat in the courtroom and listened to the sentences. 15 years. Vernon would be 68 when he got out if he survived prison. Pritchard would be 63. Hoskins, 59. Their careers destroyed, their reputations ruined, their families shamed. Justice served. But justice came with a price. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Maggie's house burned down. She was at work when it happened. Ruth was at a neighbor's house. The fire department said it started in multiple places simultaneously. Accelerant detected. Arson, no question. The house was a total loss. Everything gone except what they'd been wearing that day and the few things at the neighbor's. The insurance company paid out, but slowly. Maggie and Ruth moved into a room above the feed store in town, sharing a bathroom with 3 other families. It was cramped, cold, but safe. The local sheriff, Gordon Hewitt, came to see her. He was a big man, 60 years old, with 30 years in law enforcement. Quote, 67, quote, he said. Quote, 68, quote. Quote, 69, quote. Hewitt hesitated. Quote, 70, quote. Quote, 71, quote. Quote, 72, quote. Quote, 73, quote. 3 days later, Maggie was driving home from work when another truck forced her off the road. Her car rolled into a ditch. She wasn't seriously hurt, bruised ribs, cut on her forehead, shaken up, but it wasn't an accident. The truck didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Sheriff Hewitt found paint transfer on her car matching a Dodge truck registered to Walter Pritchard, Dalton's younger brother. They brought Walter in for questioning. He denied everything, claimed his truck had been stolen that day, reported it to the sheriff's office that evening. But the timeline didn't match. The theft was reported 3 hours after Maggie's accident. Hewitt charged him with attempted vehicular assault, held him on $5,000 bail. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and danger to witnesses. Walter Pritchard sat in county jail awaiting trial. On November 3, 1943, Maggie was walking home from the feed store to her room when 2 men grabbed her off the street. It was 7:15 p.m., already dark. They pulled her into an alley, shoved her against a wall. One of them she recognized, Harvey Blackwood's son Donald, who'd been too young to be charged in the conspiracy. The other was a stranger, older, built like a boxer, Donald said. His breath smelled of whiskey. Quote 76, quote 77. He hit her, backhanded, across the face. Her head snapped to the side, blood filled her mouth. Quote 78. The other man grabbed her arms, pinned them. Donald hit her again, in the stomach this time. Maggie doubled over, gasping. Donald said, he pulled out a knife. That's when Sheriff Hewitt's deputy, Tom Patterson, came around the corner. He'd been following Maggie at Hewitt's orders, keeping watch. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 81, underscore, underscore. The 2 men ran. Patterson chased them, blowing his whistle. Other deputies converged. They caught both men 3 blocks away, tackled them in front of the post office. Donald Blackwood was charged with assault and battery, attempted assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to intimidate a federal witness. The other man, identified as Curtis Vale, a Baltimore enforcer with a criminal record, faced the same charges, plus crossing state lines to commit a felony. Both were held without bail. Federal charges filed by U.S. Attorney's Office. Maggie spent the night in the hospital, kept for observation. Bruised face, bruised ribs, cut lip. Ruth stayed with the neighbor. Sheriff Hewitt came to see her the next morning. "This has to stop," he said. "These people aren't going to quit." "I know. I want to offer you protection. Round-the-clock deputy outside your room, escort to and from work." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Maggie thought about Ruth, about raising her daughter in a town where men waited in alleys with knives. Thought about Dale, somewhere in training, getting ready to ship overseas, believing his wife and daughter were safe at home. "I want to take Ruth and leave," she said. "Go somewhere else, start over." "Where?" "I don't know. Somewhere they won't find us." Hewitt nodded slowly. "I can arrange that. Witness protection, federal program. New town, new identity, new life. But you'd have to cut all ties here, no contact with anyone." "Even Dale?" "Especially Dale. If they track him, they track you." Maggie felt something break inside her chest. Leave everything, everyone. Become someone else. Live in hiding. "I need to think about it." She thought about it for 2 days. Lay in the hospital bed, stared at the ceiling, weighed her options. Stay and fight. Protect her daughter with armed deputies and court appearances and the constant fear. Leave and hide. Give up her life, her identity, her husband. Or a third option. The one she'd been avoiding. The choice wasn't easy. Witness protection meant safety, meant Ruth could grow up without looking over her shoulder, meant they could start fresh somewhere nobody knew about the trial or the conspiracy or the threats. But it also meant lying to everyone, including Dale when he came home from the war. Meant never seeing her parents again, never visiting her hometown, never working in agriculture again because someone might recognize her expertise and connect it back to Pennsylvania. It meant erasing Margaret Whitmore Cunningham from existence. Could she do that? Could she become someone else? Live a false life? Teach Ruth to live a false life? And what happened when Ruth grew up and asked about her father, about where they came from, about why they had no family, no roots, no history? What kind of life was that for a child? On the other hand, staying meant danger. These men had already burned her house, run her off the road, beaten her in an alley. What would they do next? Walter Pritchard was in jail. Donald Blackwood was in jail. But there were others. Brothers, cousins, friends loyal to the convicted men. Men who felt their livelihoods had been destroyed by her testimony. Men who wanted revenge. Could she protect Ruth from all of them? Could she live every day wondering if this would be the day someone tried again? She thought about Dale, somewhere in New Jersey, training to fight in Europe, believing his wife and daughter were safe at home. What would he want her to do? The safe thing, probably. Take Ruth and disappear. Protect their child at all costs. That's what any father would want. But Dale had married a woman who stood up when she saw something wrong. He'd supported her work, encouraged her education, respected her judgment. Would he want her to run? Or would he want her to finish what she'd started? On the second night, lying in the dark hospital room, Maggie realized something. If she ran, they won. Not legally, they were in prison, they'd been convicted, justice had been served on paper. But practically, they won. They'd driven her out, silenced her, made her disappear. They'd proven that standing up had consequences too severe to bear, that truth-telling cost more than it was worth. And the next time someone at Ridgefield or another farm saw something wrong, they'd remember what happened to Maggie Cunningham. They'd remember she'd told the truth and lost everything. They'd remember she'd fought corruption and ended up in hiding. And they'd keep quiet. That's what Vernon Blackwood and his conspirators wanted. Not just to escape punishment themselves, but to make an example, to teach everyone else that cooperation with law enforcement meant destruction. And if Maggie ran, If she took witness protection and disappeared, she'd be helping them teach that lesson. The message would be clear. This is what happens to people who talk. They lose their homes, their identities, their lives. Better to stay quiet. Better to look the other way. Better to let corruption flourish than to pay the price of fighting it. No, Maggie wasn't going to send that message. She wasn't going to let them win. She called Sheriff Hewitt back. "I'm not leaving," she said, "and I'm not hiding." "Then what?" "I'm going to finish this. Every single one of them who's come after me, I'm going to see them prosecuted. And I'm going to make sure Vernon Blackwood and the others understand that if anything happens to me or Ruth, there are sealed documents with the FBI that will add murder charges to their sentences. Make sure they know that. Make sure everyone knows that." Hewitt stared at her. "You're going to use yourself as bait." "I'm going to be visible, undeniable. They can't make me disappear without making themselves the obvious suspects. And they're already in federal prison facing 15-year sentences. Add murder, they're looking at life or the chair. Even they aren't that stupid. You're betting your life on them being rational. I'm betting my life on them being afraid. Fear is more reliable than rationality." Hewitt shook his head, but he was smiling. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the craziest." "Can't I be both?" He laughed. "I'll spread the word, but I'm still putting deputies on you." "I won't argue with that." The word spread. FBI made it clear. Any harm to Margaret Cunningham meant automatic murder investigation with all federal resources. U.S. Attorney's Office filed notice in federal court that witness intimidation charges would be aggressively prosecuted. Sheriff Hewitt made sure every member of every family connected to the convicted men understood the situation. Touch Maggie Cunningham, and the full weight of federal law enforcement comes down on you. The attacks stopped. Donald Blackwood and Curtis Vale were tried in federal court in January 1944, convicted, sentenced to 8 years each. Walter Pritchard's trial for the car incident came in February, convicted, 5 years. 3 more men off the streets. Maggie rebuilt. Insurance money came through. She bought a small house on the other side of town. Moved in with Ruth in March 1944. Got a dog, a big German shepherd named Major. Started working again, full-time, at a different farm outside town. The collective had reorganized, brought in new management, cleaned house. They hired Maggie as head livestock manager. First woman in the county to hold that position. She was 27 years old. Dale came home on leave in April 1944, 2 weeks before shipping out to Europe. He'd completed training, was assigned to a tank maintenance battalion, would be leaving from New York in early May. Maggie met him at the station. He looked different, leaner, harder, older than his 28 years. They held each other for a long time on the platform. That night, after Ruth was asleep, they talked. Maggie told him everything. The investigation, the trial, the attacks, the arrests. Dale listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a minute. He finally said. Cale shook his head. He shook his head. Maggie took his hand. Shipped out May 7th. Maggie stood on the platform again, watching another train pull away, taking her husband to war. This time she did cry, holding Ruth, both of them crying together. But she didn't break. She couldn't afford to. Dale's letters came regularly at first. Basic training in England, then France after D-Day, moving with Patton's army across Europe. Tank maintenance in the field, 12-hour days, mud and cold and constant danger from artillery. But alive, writing every week, sending his love. Maggie wrote back, long letters about Ruth's progress in school, about the farm, about the town. About the trials still ongoing, the last of the co-conspirators being sentenced. About rebuilding their life, piece by piece. In September 1944, the letters stopped. Maggie waited a week, then 2, then 3. No word. She called the War Department, was told his unit was engaged in heavy fighting near the German border, mail service disrupted. Wait for further information. She waited. On October 15th, a telegram arrived. Western Union. Official War Department notification. Regret to inform you that Corporal Dale Cunningham was wounded in action September 23rd in France. Currently hospitalized in England. Conditions serious but stable. Further information to follow. Maggie read it 3 times, hands shaking. Wounded but alive. Serious but stable. That could mean anything. Lost a leg, lost an arm, burned, blinded. But alive. She wrote immediately to the hospital address provided. No response for 6 weeks. Then a letter. Not from Dale, but from an Army nurse named Lieutenant Sarah Chen. Dear Mrs. Cunningham, your husband asked me to write this letter as he is unable to write himself at present. He was injured by shrapnel from an artillery shell that struck near his position. He sustained injuries to both hands and his right leg. The surgeons were able to save his hands with most functionality intact, though he has limited mobility in 2 fingers on his left hand. His right leg required partial amputation below the knee. He is recovering well and is in good spirits considering the circumstances. He wants you to know that he is alive, that he loves you and Ruth, and that he will be coming home as soon as he is able to travel. The doctors estimate he will be fit for transport to the United States within 2 months. Maggie sat at the kitchen table and read the letter to Ruth, who is now 4 years old. Daddy's coming home, she said. He's hurt, but he's coming home. Will he be okay? Ruth asked. Yes, sweetheart, he'll be okay. Dale returned to the United States in January 1945, shipped to Walter Reed Hospital in Washington for rehabilitation. Maggie took Ruth and went to visit him in February. He was in a wheelchair, his right leg ending just below the knee, his left hand bandaged. But he was smiling when he saw them. They spent a week there, in a boarding house near the hospital, visiting every day. Dale played with Ruth, told her stories about England and France, made her laugh. At night, alone with Maggie, he talked about what happened. The shell, the explosion, waking up in the field hospital, the surgeries, the pain. I thought I wasn't going to make it, he said. I thought I'd broken my promise to you. But you didn't. You're here. Half of me is here. All the parts that matter are here. Dale looked at her. I'm not going to be able to work the same. Can't operate a tractor with 1 leg and limited use of my hand. So we'll figure something else out. You're good with engines, good with your head. You'll find work. What if I can't? Then we'll manage. I'm head livestock manager now, making good money. We'll be fine. I don't want you supporting me. Dale Cunningham, you spent 4 years working to support us. Then you went to war and nearly died defending this country. If I need to support you for a while, that's not charity. That's marriage. That's what we promised each other. He pulled her close. They sat together in the hospital room, holding each other, while outside the winter snow fell on Washington. Dale came home in April 1945, 3 weeks before VE Day. The war in Europe was ending, the war in the Pacific grinding on. He was discharged with a medical pension, $75 a month, and a Purple Heart. The town gave him a hero's welcome, parade down Main Street, speeches by the mayor. Dale sat in his wheelchair, uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful to be home. The adjustment wasn't easy. The house Maggie had bought after the fire wasn't set up for a wheelchair. Doorways too narrow, bathroom inaccessible, kitchen counters too high. Dale couldn't reach the sink to wash his hands, couldn't get to the toilet without help, couldn't navigate the single step from the back door to the yard. For the first week, he stayed mostly in the front room, frustrated, angry at his limitations. Ed Kowalski came by on the 3rd day. He'd brought tools, lumber, a measuring tape. Quote, _136 he said. They spent the afternoon measuring doorways, planning modifications. Ed brought his sons to help with the work. Over the next 2 weeks, they widened the doorway to the bathroom, built a ramp from the back door to the yard, lowered the kitchen sink, installed grab bars everywhere Dale might need them. They didn't ask for payment. "You fought for us," Ed said. "This is the least we can do." Dale took a job at Ed's engine repair shop in early May, working on lawn mowers, generators, farm equipment. The owner had modified the workspace so Dale could work sitting down, installed pulleys and lifts so he didn't need to bend or stand. Ed also taught him the bookkeeping side of the business, tracking orders, managing inventory, billing customers. "You can't work a wrench all day with that hand," Ed said, "but you've got a good head for numbers. Use it." The pay was $40 a week, less than Dale had made as a mechanic before the war, but more than many men were making in 1945. Combined with his pension and Maggie's salary, they were comfortable. Not wealthy, but stable. They could pay their bills, put food on the table, save a little each month. Ruth adjusted to having her father home, though it took time. She'd been 2 when he left, was nearly 5 when he returned. She didn't really remember him from before the war. To her, this man in the wheelchair was essentially a stranger who her mother said was her father. But Dale was patient. He'd play with her in the evenings, read her stories, help her with the simple arithmetic she was learning in kindergarten. Slowly, over months, she warmed to him. By the time she started first grade in September 1945, she was climbing into his lap for bedtime stories, calling him Daddy without hesitation. They became a family again, though not the same family they'd been before. That family, young mechanic, young livestock specialist, toddler daughter, all of them healthy and whole, was gone, broken by the war. This new family had a wounded veteran, a woman who'd brought down a criminal conspiracy, and a child growing up in the shadow of both those histories. Different, but still theirs. Maggie continued as head livestock manager, traveling between 3 farms in the county, overseeing breeding programs, consulting on feed efficiency, training younger workers. The war had taken so many men that women had stepped into positions that would have been unthinkable before. Maggie wasn't the only female manager in the county anymore. There were 2 others, both in their 30s, both running successful operations. In August 1945, the war ended. Japan surrendered. The world began the slow work of rebuilding. The trials of the farm conspiracy had concluded the year before, all sentences handed down, all appeals exhausted. Vernon Blackwood and Dalton Pritchard were in federal prison in Pennsylvania, serving their 15-year terms. The others were scattered in prisons across the state system. The story faded from the news. Life moved on. But Maggie didn't forget. Every month she wrote to the U.S. Attorney's Office requesting updates on the prisoners, where they were held, how they were doing, when they were eligible for parole. She tracked them like she'd once tracked breeding stock, keeping meticulous records. Vernon Blackwood tried for early parole in 1950 after serving 7 years. Maggie testified at his parole hearing, reminded the board that he'd orchestrated a conspiracy that stole over $200,000 from the war effort, that his associates had tried to kill her, that he'd shown no remorse. Parole denied. He tried again in 1953. Maggie testified again. Denied again. He served his full sentence, was released in 1958 at age 63. He moved to Pittsburgh, worked as a night watchman at a warehouse, lived in a boarding house. He died in 1962 of a heart attack. Dalton Pritchard developed tuberculosis in prison in 1951, spent 2 years in the prison hospital, came out a shadow of his former self. Released in 1958, returned to Lancaster County, tried to find work. Nobody would hire him. He ended up doing odd jobs, living in a trailer, drinking. Died in 1959, cirrhosis. Raymond Hoskins served his 12 years, released in 1955. Moved to Ohio, away from Pennsylvania, away from people who knew him. Worked as a clerk in a farm supply store. Died in 1968. Theodore Grantham and Harvey Blackwood both served their full terms, Both left Pennsylvania after release. Grantham went to Florida, Harvey to California. Neither returned. Both died in the early 1970s, forgotten men in forgotten places. The others served their time and disappeared. None of them ever had successful lives after prison. The scheme had destroyed them more thoroughly than any sentence could have. Maggie worked until she was 65, retiring in 1982. She'd spent 43 years in agriculture, 38 of them at the management level. She'd written 2 textbooks on dairy cattle breeding, consulted for the Department of Agriculture, served on the board of the Pennsylvania State College Alumni Association. She was recognized as one of the leading livestock specialists in the state. Dale had passed away in 1977, the combination of his war injuries and age catching up to him at 61. They'd had 38 years together, most of them good, some of them hard, all of them honest. Ruth had grown up, gone to college, become a teacher, married, had 3 children of her own. She'd studied history at Pennsylvania State, graduated in 1962, started teaching at the same elementary school in Lancaster she'd attended as a child. She married Thomas Warren, a civil engineer, in 1964. They had 3 children, David in 1966, Sarah in 1968, Margaret in 1971, named after her grandmother. Ruth told her children the story of what their grandmother had done, but she told it carefully, age-appropriately. When they were young, it was a simple tale. Grandma Maggie saw people doing something wrong at work, told the police, and the bad people went to jail. As they got older, the story gained detail. Grandma Maggie had risked her life. People burned her house, tried to hurt her. She kept going anyway because she knew it was right. When David was in high school, working on a paper about ethics, Ruth took him to visit Maggie. He interviewed his grandmother, asked her about the decision to come forward, about the fear, about whether she'd do it again. Every time, Maggie told him, I do it every time. Because if good people stay quiet when they see wrong, then wrong wins. And I wasn't willing to let wrong win. David asked her what she'd been most afraid of. Maggie thought about that. Quote, she said. Quote, quote, quote. David wrote his paper, got an A, went on to study law. He graduated from law school in 1991, became a prosecutor, worked in the Philadelphia DA's office for 20 years. He said later that his grandmother's story was what made him want to fight corruption, to hold powerful people accountable. Quote, he said, quote, Sarah became a veterinarian, specialized in large animal practice, worked with dairy cattle her entire career. She said she chose that path because of the stories Grandma Maggie told about the farm, about understanding animals, about the science of breeding and husbandry. Sarah said, Margaret, the youngest, became a teacher like her mother, taught history at the high school level. She assigned her students to research local history, to find stories of courage in their own communities. Every year, at least one student would discover the story of Margaret Whitmore Cunningham and write about it. And every year, Margaret Warren would have that student present to the class, would use her grandmother's story as a teaching moment. History isn't just big events and famous people, she'd tell her students. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 152, underscore, underscore. 3 grandchildren, 3 careers, all influenced by one woman's choice in March 1943 to document what she saw instead of looking away. Maggie spent her retirement years in the same house she'd bought in 1944, the one she'd raised Ruth in. She gardened, she read, she wrote her memoirs. She attended county fair every year, judging the livestock competitions, talking with young farmers, passing on what she'd learned. In 2003, at the age of 86, she was invited to speak at Pennsylvania State College's commencement ceremony. They were giving her an honorary doctorate in agriculture, recognizing her contributions to the field. Ruth came with her 3 children and 7 grandchildren. The college president, Dr. Graham Spanier, introduced her with a summary of her career. 4 decades in agriculture, 2 textbooks, countless students trained, a legacy of integrity in farm management. But then he told the other story, the one that had made her famous beyond agricultural circles. In 1943, Dr. Spanier said, Margaret Whitmore was a 26-year-old livestock specialist who saw theft and chose to act. She documented a conspiracy that had stolen over $200,000 from the war effort. She brought that evidence to the FBI, knowing she was risking her job, her safety, her family. She testified in federal court for 2 days while defense attorneys tried to discredit her. She survived arson, assault, and attempted murder. She refused witness protection, refused to hide, refused to be silenced. She stood up. And because she stood up, 14 criminals went to prison. A corrupt system was cleaned out. And a generation of agricultural workers learned that integrity matters more than comfort. Today, we honor not just her professional achievements, but her courage. Dr. Cunningham, please come forward. The applause was thunderous. Maggie walked slowly to the podium, using a cane now, her back not quite as straight as it had been, but her eyes still clear. She looked out at hundreds of graduates in caps and gowns, and at the families behind them, and at the faculty in their academic regalia. Thank you, she said. I'm honored to be here. But I want to tell you something about courage that nobody tells you when you're young. They make it sound noble, heroic, simple. You see something wrong, you stand up, you fight. Story ends, hero wins, everyone claps. But that's not how it works. Real courage is messier than that. It's making a choice that terrifies you and then living with the consequences. It's watching your house burn and knowing they might come for your daughter next. It's testifying in court while lawyers call you a liar and confused and incompetent. It's facing men with knives in a dark alley and wondering if you'll see tomorrow. It's spending 60 years looking over your shoulder, wondering if this year someone will finally come for revenge. That's courage. Not the moment of choice, but the decades of consequences. So why do it? Why stand up if it costs so much? She paused, looked at the faces in front of her. Because the cost of not standing up is higher. If I'd stayed quiet in March 1943, I'd have kept my comfortable life. But I'd have known, every single day, that I'd seen wrong and chosen safety over truth. I'd have known that men were stealing from our soldiers, from our war effort, from our country, and I'd let them because stopping them was too hard, too dangerous. I'd have taught my daughter that protecting yourself matters more than doing right. And I couldn't live with that. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror knowing I'd made that choice. The cost of courage was high, but the cost of cowardice was higher. It would have cost me my self-respect. It would have cost me my integrity. It would have cost me the ability to tell my daughter to stand up for what's right. Because how could I tell her that when I hadn't done it myself? You're graduating into a world that needs people who will stand up, who will see something wrong and refuse to accept it, who will do the hard thing, the dangerous thing, the right thing, even when it costs them. The world will try to convince you to stay quiet. It will tell you that corruption is too big to fight, that powerful people always win, that speaking up ruins careers and lives. Sometimes that's true. But silence ruins something worse. It ruins your integrity. It ruins your ability to look at yourself with respect. It ruins the world bit by bit as good people stay quiet and wrong goes unchecked. That's what education is for. Not just to make you smart, but to make you brave. To give you the tools to fight corruption, to defend truth, to build something better. Don't waste those tools. Use them. Be brave. And know that brave doesn't mean unafraid. It means doing right anyway. She looked at the rows of young faces, 22 years old, the age she'd been when she started at Ridgefield. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Maggie stood at the podium, 86 years old, still unbroken. Ruth was crying in the front row. Her grandchildren were clapping. And somewhere in that crowd of graduates, maybe 1 or 2 or 10 would remember this moment. Would remember that an 86-year-old woman with a cane had once stood up to criminals and won. Would remember that courage is possible, that truth matters, that one person can change everything. And maybe, when their moment came, when they saw wrong and had to choose, they'd remember. And they'd stand up, too. Margaret Whitmore Cunningham died on June 7, 2008, at the age of 91. She'd outlived everyone involved in the conspiracy by decades. She was buried next to Dale in the town cemetery, under an oak tree they'd planted together in 1946, the year after he came home from the war. The headstone read, __quote _159 __. Next to it, Dale's headstone. Dale Cunningham, 1916 to 1977. Mechanic, soldier, husband, father. He came home. Ruth was 67 when her mother died, surrounded by her own children and grandchildren. At the funeral, she told the story her mother had told so many times, about the morning in March 1943 when a young livestock specialist looked out a window and saw something wrong and decided to do something about it. About how one person, armed with nothing but a notebook and a conscience, had brought down a criminal conspiracy and changed the course of their county's history. The story spread through the family, through the community, through the generations. The school in town taught it as part of local history. Pennsylvania State College included it in their agricultural ethics curriculum. The County Historical Society displayed Maggie's original notebooks in a glass case, the careful handwriting still clear after 65 years. And on the Ridgefield farm, which still operated as a collective dairy operation, there was a plaque in the main office. In memory of Margaret Whitmore Cunningham, 1917 to 2008, who taught us that integrity matters more than comfort, and that silence in the face of wrong is itself a crime. Her courage built the foundation of honest agriculture in Lancaster County. The farm prospered. The county prospered. The system she'd helped clean out stayed clean, because people remembered what had happened when it wasn't, and what it cost to set it right. 2 graves under an oak tree. A woman who'd seen theft and stopped it. A man who'd gone to war and come home. Both of them ordinary people who'd done extraordinary things when the moment called for it. Both of them remembered. Both of them honored. The oak tree grew taller each year, its branches spreading wide, its roots deep in Pennsylvania soil. And beneath it, 2 stones stood together, marking the place where 2 lives well lived had come to rest. Together, as they'd always been. Together, as they'd always be.